G'day boys and girls. This has been my first Newman update in a while. Although I haven't been working on the motors lately, toying with the idea of building this next bigger one that's been a tease for quite a while. But I just had a flick through my YouTube videos and was taken by the curiosity why one of them is so much more popular than the other. And this bothered me in a way because a later update, after I'd solved one of the problems that I was encountering, I feel was a better, more informative video. Granted, perhaps not quite so amusing, but that's because you didn't see the underlying intricacies and issues that I was dealing with. Now, amusingly, these are more psychological than anything else. I feel the technical problems are pretty much licked. But really what I was dealing with, after having viewed my published circuit diagrams, is the problem of transistor base leakage, which, this is going to be a bit technical by the way. People have often commented that in my extremely efficient H-bridge circuit, the base current is leaking through into the circuit and driving the motor. It's driving the rotor. Now, at times this has been a fair criticism, even though the motor, say at 1000 volts and a couple of milliamps, if I was to say drive a transistor base with 5 volts and several hundred milliamps, there would not be several hundred milliamps of that base current going through the motor. It would be proportional, if indeed it was occurring at all. So if there was a couple of watts going through the motor, then the amount of that was coming as leakage through the base drive would be really minuscule, almost insignificant. But thankfully, quite a few people have commented on this, and that's good, because this is something I wanted to totally and utterly disprove. Now, my last published circuit diagram was when I was using 4 transformers to drive each of the 4 transistors. I needed individual transformers that were completely isolated, because the high voltages that the Newman motor creates in its operation, in accordance with Lenz's law, i.e. if I'm putting in 1000 volts, the rotor is spinning and making 1000 volts of its own, thereby balancing the power supply input, and that's only possible due to the unique configuration of the Newman motor. But what happens is, of course, because the rotor is rotating and producing 1000 volts, and the input is also 1000 volts, the input power drops to almost zero, and that will only be swayed by, well, the insertion of a gratuitous problem. So essentially, this circuit diagram didn't fully illustrate the scale of the problem I'm dealing with here. I've really taken somewhat of a psychopathic and masochistic approach to this. I'm holding myself to a standard higher than I have ever encountered before, just due to the seriousness of the situation. I mean, I've studied electronics, I'm qualified, I'm an engineer, I'm qualified for military degree soldering, so forth, and of course, 20 years experience in the free energy community plus. So in order to dissuade myself and others that this base drive leakage current was the cause of the high efficiency of the motor, I kept that thought with me throughout the evolutionary process and tried to reduce that or lick that problem at every step of the way. Now, at the time that I was running 4 transistors, 1 for each base, that was great because that enabled me to get the maximum voltage out of the motor without suffering backfeed issues through the transistor, through the emitters and up through the base, and back through the system, causing feedback and all kinds of problems, just because the lens law voltage that the motor is producing while it's running, which is why it's so great, for one reason. The problems that was causing were, well, I'm not going to say insurmountable, but at least conventionally insurmountable, because they would blow anything I tried to. Any way that I tried to drive the transistors would just vaporize, frankly. They couldn't handle the voltage breakdown. So yeah, I dealt with this problem with a selection of diodes and complete and that wasn't enough by itself, by the way, and complete isolation of the base drive on each transistor, and that was via AC transformers. So there was the argument that, oh, your free energy machine, Patrick, it has, it's 800 volts and 3 or 4 milliamps going in. Great, very efficient, but what are those? You see slightly off to the side there are 4 AC mains transformers with bridge rectifiers and capacitors on them. Oh gee, I'm not quite as blown away as I should be, and fair point. And I really appreciate how succinct the arguments were to assist me in addressing that. So the final version of the motor was the final video I made was really quite ridiculous, and it really did display the underlying psychopathic and masochistic nature of what I was putting myself through in order to guarantee that this problem wasn't occurring, because throughout my study in electronics and qualification, the teachings assure you that this problem wasn't occurring. Those transistors, the transformers, are not feeding through the H bridge, and they are not powering a load. I had to prove what I was measuring is what I was measuring, and conventionally speaking, it was fairly sound. But there are people out there who don't understand electronics at the depth I do, and they were not swayed. They were not convinced by intuitively or by whatever means. I would like to say they were not swayed intuitively by what I was demonstrating. And frankly, electronics is, to some degree, just water flowing through a pipe. So if I can't prove to them, despite their lack of knowledge, that it is what I say it is, then I'm not really satisfied, because if they've got intuitive doubts, then I do too. And I did, because a lot of what is read and taught and published is wrong. People don't understand the full scope of how electricity works and how the components work and interact, and there are all kinds of mysteries throughout electronics that people know nothing about that are always having an effect. So I, although be it was 90, 95, 99% convinced, others were also not completely convinced. So, as I said, my last video was quite ridiculous in its nature. I'd replaced all my previous transistor isolation, base isolation circuitry, in order to prove this was not occurring, that the meter going in and out of that motor was all there is, and despite everything else hooked up to it, alright, what it says on that meter is correct, and that motor is using such a small amount of power. So finally I end up with solar panels. I had individual LEDs powering individual solar panels, and each of those, with all the additional timing circuitry and so forth, were powering the transistor bases. So everything was completely isolated. There was no earths in the wrong place. It was not earthing leakage current through a transformer back through the grounding system of my house, up through there, through my other power supplies, which are also isolated, and then back through. You know, there was no possibility of any leakage current at all. So after 1.5 years of playing with these things, I not only got a motor that was very good, I got a motor that was accurately measured. And the video where I finally came to that conclusion is disappointingly not as popular as others, but that's okay, that's life, you know. I take solace in the fact that that I did get a lot of great comments, and there are a lot of people with equally magnificent degrees of enthusiasm following the work, and that is just fantastic. Granted, haven't got any donations or people offering to chip in for the next one, which is a real shame, but the enthusiasm alone is fantastic, and as it happens, I've already bought most of the main components anyway, so don't worry about that. Now, the last video doesn't prove over unity, and none of them prove over unity, because it's very difficult to extract a small amount of energy from the motor in an efficient way. Granted, they are very, very seductive. These Newman motors are very seductive. You can spin them at low speeds, they'll have a lot of torque, and they are using 0.2 watts. As little as 0.2 watts. And that much, and a lot of potential torque. And it's just phenomenal. You know, I mean, 0.2 watts. I mean, this is my car bleeper, and probably operates on about, you know, the same amount of energy, you know, give or take. So absolutely amazing. And then you turn up to quite high RPMs, quite high voltages. Notice the potential torque there, using a couple of watts. And really, once you've reduced the motor to that little idle input, the only thing you're paying for is air resistance and bearing resistance. The machine is so finely tuned that that's what you're paying for. It's basically like you know, spinning a spinning top in space. You know, it will just keep going forever, no energy input. So yeah, I was quite happy to pay 2 or 3 watts for a motor that spins quite fast, and all I'm paying for is the air resistance and, you know, and so forth. Brilliant, absolutely amazing. But I think the most important aspect of this motor is its broad scope for application, because no motor on the market will do that, but also motors are tuned and they have a very specific peak energy efficiency, that they're only very efficient at a certain voltage and a certain RPM. So the Newman motor is not like that at all. It is absolutely incredible, very, very, very high efficiency. You know, potentially, I think personally, higher than any efficiency motor out there, any off-the-shelf efficiency motor out there, and not just at peak. It's higher efficiency than all other motors out there at any voltage or any speed. It is literally the best motor you can get. So the seductivity of that can often excite one and detract them from their ultimate pursuit, which is of course a motor that far exceeds that, and by a significant margin. So the question is it a free energy machine? Well, hard to say. Theoretically, I've determined, based on parallels with other experiments, i.e. how powerful magnets are and how powerful electromagnets are, and is there a limit to magnetic power? I mean, if you've got a 1 watt electromagnet and a large magnet, and then you increase the size of the magnet, and the electromagnet pushes off further, increase the size of the magnet again, and so you can essentially get an infinite number of force, an infinite amount of force applied on an electromagnet from a magnet that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So the precedent is set. You can get 1 watt of electromagnet energy and get an infinite number of power out. Now, there are geometric problems with doing this in a rotational system. So I think half the reason why machines out there is because organising their geometry to make them work is not just inconvenient but impractical for all conventional applications. Or is it? So I happen to think it is possible to make these work, and I've seen plenty of evidence out there and here that determines that that's possible. So I'm going to continue the pursuit, and I feel a little bit better having shared that with you, that my best video, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of proving that the measurements are accurate, pertains to a video called Newman Update COP1 in Sync, released on September 21, 2019. Got whisker under 500 views. So, and the essence of that is the usage of the isolated solar panels for the base drive. And really, what's holding back these Newman motors from achieving far more obvious levels of over-unity is their size. It's contingent on a larger size motor, and if you can get the coil resistance down, you'd be doing very well as well. So, glad to share the update. Hope you're as interested as I'm going to call this one right now, keep it short, in the interest of being succinct and saying what I had to say. So thank you very much, and stay on it.